Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and I got some of the best here in the biz with me. From the mean streets of California, it's Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's back. Nolan King joins us this week, the Boston shot caller. And all the way from the 416 out in Toronto, Canada, reporter extraordinaire, Mike Bond. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. All right. Topic number one, guys, on Saturday night, Colby Covington defeated Jorge Masvidal in the main event at UFC 272 after all the buildup, all the personal trash talk, and a convincing unanimous decision. Are you satisfied with closing the book on the rivalry between Covington and Masvidal? 4 minutes are on the clock. Goes. Get us started.
Look, I love me a good rivalry, and smack talk for sure can sell fights. I get it. It can be entertaining. But all this was a little bit too chaotic for me, guys. No pun intended. I know Colby Covington's involved. But, I mean, come on. At the presser, you really couldn't understand what was going on, what people were saying. There's one guy shouting, another guy saying the same thing over and over. It was just kind of cringy. It wasn't really what I was expecting to happen. It didn't stand up to other rivalries. You know, gyms were involved, money, family. It was so many highs and lows that really, I just wanted that fight to be over with. And at the end of the day, that's what happened with this fight is we got a clear-cut winner. And I think that is what should shut the door on this book. I mean, even Jorge Masvidal in the press conference, like, he didn't really have much to say in that regards. Like, he understood that he has to work on some things for this to ever even come up ever again. And if it ever did come up again, by then, Jorge Masvidal is going to be much older. I just don't understand what would be left here in a rematch. So for me, I feel like this fight will happen again. It's just not going to happen in the cage, guys.
Yeah, that's right. They occupy the same county or city or whatever. So that is a possibility, Goes. I wouldn't want to see that. But all right, Nolan, how about you, man? Are you just as exhausted as Goes on this rivalry?
Yeah, I think it kind of has overextended its stay, or maybe it just stayed the appropriate amount of time. Like, we saw the guys fight, now it's over. I mean, you could really do this with any rivalry, right? You could say that there's unfinished business, but I mean, man, that fight was lopsided in one direction, and sure, nobody got knocked out, and Masvidal can say that things could have gone differently or whatever. But, like, I think that's it. Maybe down the line, somehow, some way, we never want to rule out anything in this sport. Sometimes the stars will realign for some sort of rematch, but I'm good with it, man. I think the buildup was perhaps maybe not everybody's cup of tea. But once we got there, I mean, the fight happened, and it was pretty clear who was the better of the two fighters.
All right, Mike, is it unanimous, or can I give you an opposite take here? I mean, Miesha Tate, she didn't do too well against Ronda Rousey, but they were able to revive that one. Can they do that with this one?
I mean, they could. I think what Nolan said there, that was pretty spot on. Like, some stuff just needs to happen. Like, there either needs to be an alignment of, a specific chain of losses or wins for these guys, just a combination that makes the fight make sense. Right now, it doesn't. Masvidal, in a way, is on a way down with 3 straight losses. Covington is still very much the number 1 ranked contender. He's the second best welterweight outside the champion, in my opinion. So right now, it just doesn't make sense. Already, this fight coming in, I believe, is 1 versus 6 in the rankings. So at least according to the UFC's rankings. So to me, they're going different directions. A rematch in the near future doesn't make any sense. And honestly, I got my fix from this fight, as kind of Nolan said there. We saw just enough. I know there was talk originally about doing a season of The Ultimate Fighter with these two. I'm really, really glad that wasn't the case. I think stretching out this beef to like a 12-week reality series or 10 weeks or whatever they do would have been way overkill, and we would have just been so sick and tired of it by the end of it. But with this, I think they announced it like mid-January, something like that. We got a good 6-7 weeks of build. We got the hype, we got the interviews, we got the press conference. It did just enough for me. This was a super personal. It was a real beef between these two. And I think if you just let it wind out too much longer coming in, it would have been left a really bad taste in our mouth. But I think there's still some distasteful stuff that happened between these two, but it was enough that I think we can be satisfied with it and move on. Never say never, as Nolan said, but for me, completely shut the door on this. I'm good with anything going forward between Masvidal and Covington.
All right. Well, hey, it's hard to disagree with you guys because, again, by the time they did fight, it was pretty one-sided. Masvidal had a couple moments knocking him to his knee, but it just wasn't enough. I agree with you guys. All right, guys. After the fight was over, Covington immediately turned his attention to another former ATT teammate in Dustin Poirier as he went after him, his wife, and their kid. What did you think of the call out itself? And is this a fight that should be made? 4 minutes are on the clock. Nolan, start things off.
I mean, if it was made, I wouldn't complain, certainly. But I think when you look at this, right, you have two guys that are kind of in weird positions in their career. I mean, Dustin's fought for the title a couple times. He's come up short. And then you've got Colby, same thing. But there's a difference between these two guys, and that's in that Colby Covington seems to be the number 2 guy in the world. Like, he's stride above everyone else that's below him, except for one man. So that's a lot different, I think, of a situation than Dustin Poirier is in, where there are still a lot of fun fights that he could fight in. There's a lot of top tier guys that he could fight over there. Sure, he's fought a solid amount of them. He's fought Charles Oliveira. He's fought Justin Gaethje. But I still think that there are some fights out there at 155 where he fights his best, I might add, that he could still take and work his way back to contendership. I mean, heck, he's one of the biggest stars in that division, and I think that we've seen over time the UFC certainly puts star power before anything else. So I really don't think that you can rule out that Dustin Poirier could get a third title shot depending on who the champion is at that time. Now, Colby Covington, the problem with this is the guy that's beat him twice is still the belt holder. So I think that Colby, if he were to switch divisions, it would make more sense. Dustin moving up to 170, I mean, I don't really get it. You know, he hasn't seemed to be very interested in giving some clout to Covington or giving him the spotlight, whatever he said. So for me, I mean, if they made it, I wouldn't complain. It would be interesting, but I don't think that there's any need for Dustin Poirier to move out of 155 just for this Colby Covington fight.
I agree with that. And once back in the day, Colby Covington did tell us he felt like there was a 155 card to play at some point. So interesting to see if now will be the time. How about you, Mike? What are your thoughts on this?
Man, I guess just first and foremost, the call out, pretty in bad taste. I mean, if you want to go after Dustin Poirier and the things he said about him leaving the gym or it's on site or all these things, that's cool. But bringing the guy's wife and then his kid into the conversation, you know, saying it's Connor's kid and just all these things that for Colby Covington, for him to say it, it may not be that jarring just because he says this kind of stuff so often. But if you actually take it and, you know, put it on its own, it's a pretty gross thing to say. I mean, this is some helpless child who does not deserve to be dragged into this conversation and into the hype and build around a fight. You don't need that. I think Colby Covington, be more creative. You can do better than, you know, bringing Dustin's child into the trash talk. That said, obviously a lot of heat between these two. They genuinely dislike each other, especially on Dustin's side. And I believe him, though, when he says he does not want to give Colby Covington the limelight, allow him to make a payday off of all the star power Dustin Poirier has accrued for himself. So I do not think this fight's going to happen inside the octagon in the UFC. Unless Poirier has a change of heart. If he's going to fight Nate Diaz, I believe it's going to be at welterweight. If he wins that fight, maybe he looks around and says, hey, Colby, I like this weight class. Colby Covington is the number 1 ranked guy there. If I beat him, I'm looking at a title shot at 170 against Kamaru Usman or whoever the champion may be. How he would do in that fight, a completely different topic, but I think he could maybe see some massive upside in fighting and beating Colby Covington. So maybe that's something he reconsiders. But as of now, I do not think we're going to see that fight. I think Poirier is going to stand true with his guns and not fight Colby Covington.
I hadn't thought of that. You're right. Covington has the number 1 position there to Kamaru Usman. I guess Poirier could steal all that shine. How about you guys? What are your thoughts?
Zero interest in this fight. I don't feel like it proves anything. There's really no sense in having it. I mean, every personal beef does not need to be squashed in the octagon. I mean, this is a guy that's fought as low as 145, and he's fighting the second best welterweight in the world. Like, to me, it really accomplishes nothing in my sense. And I know that Colby Covington feels like he's in no man's land, but there are some decent matchups for him. And Dustin Poirier in that crazy division where people are just constantly fighting, things can align from him too. He's not that far away. So I think each guy needs to stay in their division, and there's no sense in having this fight.
Yeah, and you know what? For some reason, guys, I think it's going to be Covington against the winner of Burns and Khamzat Chimaev, just because Usman's still pushed out, and then they still got to have the Leon Edwards fight. All right, we shall see. Let's go talk about the co-main event a little bit. Rafael dos Anjos, known as RDA, he defeated Renato Moicano pretty soundly on the judges' scorecards, but most of the broadcast, and it was all over social media, this was focused, the big focus was the fight not getting stopped. As you know, aside from Moicano quitting on his own, and that wasn't going to happen, right? His corner, the ringside physician, and the referee could have also stopped the fight. How did this sit with you? Mike, start off 4 minutes.
Not great, obviously. I think I was part of the reaction that was going as the fight was ongoing. I think Michael Bisping and Joe Rogan, John Anik did a pretty good job calling this thing live and being like, why is this fight still ongoing? But to me, the issue with this whole thing started before either of these two guys got inside the octagon. I think the onus a little bit falls on the UFC in putting Renato Moicano in a situation where he was scheduled for 5 rounds under these circumstances. I understand why this was 5 rounds originally. It was supposed to be a main event, RDA versus Fiziev. For a fight night, they push it back to the pay-per-view. They want to keep it 5 rounds because that's the contract these guys had signed. That's what they had been training for. But once it gets switched out, I don't understand why you need to keep it Moicano. He was already flying, halfway across the world, cutting 20 pounds, doing all these things, no training camp. Then you put in a scenario of 5 rounds. Just makes no sense to me to have him do that. I get it. RDA was training for 5 rounds. There is a bump in pay that comes with a 5-round fight, but I think they could have still made that right with RDA. It just seemed needless to me. And then, that's where the 10 minutes of extra damage accrued was over those 4th and 5th rounds, which were completely needless in my opinion. So I do think the UFC shoulders some of the blame for even putting these circumstances, but once you move into the actual fight itself, I think everyone takes a share of it, from the referee to the corner to the doctor who inexplicably said, he can see, which I think put Mark Goddard in a position to have to allow the fight to continue. So there's a lot of layers to this mess here. Hopefully Renato Moicano is healthy and gets back in the octagon soon, but yeah, just unnecessary damage for him in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right, because if anything, this wasn't even like some sort of a clear number 1 to get to the title. We didn't have to have it over 5 rounds. Agreed there. Strong points from Mike Bond. Goes, what are your thoughts?
I think we all get wrapped up in the moment sometimes and what people are going to say and, after the fight on social media about my performance, all that. But come on, guys. I mean, we have to be a little bit more selfish. I think fighters need to think more about the future. That's the issue here. We know you're a tough guy. We get it. Just taking the fight alone proves that. You did the UFC a massive favor, and I know they're going to reward you, but you got to think about your future. I mean, come on out there. There were times where he could barely walk. He had that eye closed. It seemed like the doctor and the referee were on the same page, but nobody really wanted to pull the trigger. So this is a week-to-week sport, guys. We're going to be talking about something else. This pride and everything that Moicano showed, that's all going to get swept under the rug. You get paid, but people forget about it. But you still have to live with your injuries and everything that comes from that. You have a career that is still young. You could still do a lot of things in the sport. So I think there's moments in time where we do have to save these guys from themselves. And it was tough. It was tough for me to watch. I've seen a lot of fights, but I had a big problem watching that fight, and I felt really bad. This is something that fighters just need to be a little bit more selfish and take care of themselves.
The worst was between rounds 4 and 5 when he just kind of was stumbling a little bit, kind of how Ronda was after Nunes got her and Herb Dean was holding her up. Nolan, how about you, man? What did you think?
Yeah, it's obviously, I think no matter what opinion you have, it's a tough call for anybody involved to make, to say, hey, this fight's going to be over. This guy, we're going to take away definitively his chance to win. But yeah, man, I mean, Moicano was getting beat up. He was, from what I've heard, he was tired right off the bat, essentially, when we're talking to his team. They just said, as soon as he got up off that ground, I think his gas tank was already starting to wear on him in the first round. So to me, when Mark Goddard was kind of having those feelings and the referee doctor leaned to him and said, I'd be okay if you called this. To me, that was the opportunity, the best opportunity for them to call it. And I think it's just on everybody involved, honestly.
Yeah, a good. I mean, exactly. Spread it amongst everybody. But I think at the end, even after the doctor released it, I still felt like Mark Goddard should have made a move. The only thing that saved him is that Moicano, like a zombie, rose from the dead, and he was throwing some potent strikes out there. But still, I still stand by the fact I think it was a bad decision. All right, let's go to topic number 4 here. Chaos and Game Bread. They dominated the talk all week. We did have 12 other fights, though, on Saturday's UFC 272 card. What was another big takeaway from that card that you want to discuss? This could be a fight or even a simple news story. How about you guys? Start things off with 4 minutes.
Oh, the card as a whole made you forget that there was a pandemic going on, that there's wars going on. Las Vegas was humming again. You know, people came out, the list of celebrities that showed up, you could tell the magnitude of this card. But the guys at the top of the bill, they weren't really the ones that I felt. I mean, Colby Covington showed up, but the rivalry didn't really pay off. But who it did pay off for, in my opinion, was Bryce Mitchell. I thought he had a great moment just the whole week leading up. You know, you saw he was featured and embedded a lot. And he came into the fight card. He's fighting a veteran, Edson Barbosa. A lot of us are trying to figure out where exactly Bryce Mitchell plays out in this division, but he took his best kicks, his leg kicks. I don't know what Bryce Mitchell's legs are made out of, but he just kind of shook those off, and he controlled the fight on the ground. But you have to remember, he also did that by setting it up with his striking, which I thought was really amazing. And on top of all that, you know, even when the fight's done, the whole charity thing and Dana White, I just feel like from beginning to end, this guy has proven he's a contender, and he had one of the greatest performances. So I think that's the guy that stood out for me, Bryce Mitchell.
Yeah, and from what I'm hearing, I think the UFC is gonna either match or make his actual contribution and allow him to keep his dough. So strong move by the UFC. How about you, Nolan? What did you think was a takeaway that you had aside from the main event here?
Yeah, there's obviously a few fighters I could have gone with. I think Goza's suggestion is great, Bryce Mitchell. But for me, I think seeing Kevin Holland compete in front of fans was pretty cool, right? I mean, we knew his build, and sure, he had some performances that weren't great there more recently, where he's maybe his star power is, you know, kind of plateaued a little bit, at least until he can start winning again. But most of his fights, I think the last 9 or so or 8, have been in front of an arena with no crowd. And if you look at it, that was his whole come up. That was his whole glow up. That was what made Kevin Holland kind of on people's radars and made him our fighter of the year one year. So for him to finally be able to compete in front of a crowd and to hear them, and for him to put on a fun fight like that, I mean, those both of them, Alex Oliveira, Kevin Holland, you can put those guys against anybody. They clearly compete and do so excitingly. So to see it, to hear the crowd pop, to hear them like his post-fight interview, I think the UFC is going to be pretty happy when, you know, the guy that's 4 fights down from the top of your pay-per-view is captivating a crowd like that. So that was good for me. I think he looks good at 170. It's probably where he should have been fighting all along, and that's pretty much that's my takeaway. 170 for Big Mouth from here on out.
Yeah, man. And, you know, if you think about it, he did start off in the doghouse as Big Mouth. Dana White, you know, didn't give him a contract on Dana White Contender Series. And now I think Dana says it's one of his favorite guys. Mike Bond, how about you? What was your biggest takeaway aside from the main event?
There's a lot that can go into it. I think those guys touched on it. We touched on RDA, all these things. So I guess I'll kind of round out the main card here. And to me, it's the fight that we got as the opener. It seems like the Greg Hardy experiment or experience or whatever you want to call it in the UFC is over, and probably rightfully so. This was the last fight on his UFC contract. 3 straight first round finishes, I believe. That's got to be the end of it, right? I know heavyweight's a shallow division and all these things, and you need, you know, the fighters, and he's relatively young considering all those things, but the progression, the skills just aren't matching up where I think it should be for a fighter who's being given his platform, his opportunity, you know, it's the training he has. So maybe we see Greg Hardy back in the UFC someday, but I reckon he'll probably be fighting elsewhere. I don't think they'll give him a new contract unless he's willing to take maybe a massive pay cut. So to me, he's the one that fight kind of stood out to me. But if you want to flip it on the other end to something more positive, let's give Marina Moroz all her praise, because for her to come in with everything that's going on back in her home country of the Ukraine and be able to put on a performance like she did against a fighter that she had some heat with, I think that spoke a lot about her perseverance and all that.
Yes, bravo for bringing up Marina Moroz. She had a great post-fight speech, and everyone gave her a round of applause. It was one of my favorite moments of the night. And I want to give a quick shout out to Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's going to be inducted into this year's class of the UFC Hall of Fame, and well deserved, man. So that was tremendous as well. All right,
Too soon though.
Excuse me.
Too soon though for Khabib.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to the last topic here to close this week. We're going to address a serious and sensitive topic, fellas. As you well know, former UFC heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez was arrested last week and charged with attempted murder after he allegedly chased down and shot a man in San Jose, California. Police said Velasquez was after a man accused of molesting one of his underage relatives. Since a possible motive was revealed, Velasquez has received tremendous support with the Free Cain movement. among those who think his alleged actions are justified, although a judge denied his bail on Monday. This case has put a spotlight on morality versus legality. Given what we know, what are your thoughts on this tragic situation? No time on the clock. Take your time, guys. Nolan, we'll start with you. You've been covering this for MMA Junkie.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think the phrase that you just used, legality versus morality, I mean, that's really what it's all about. And I guess first and foremost, no matter where you stand on this issue, I think everybody can come to agreement that this is some heavy stuff, man. This is an unfortunate, tragic situation across the board. Cain obviously was beloved by MMA fans, never once or necessarily want to be in the spotlight. And so it's not surprising to me that you see all the support that he has just from those reviews that we've heard over the years about what he brings to AKA, to San Jose, to the MMA community as a whole. And obviously very tight-knit community across the board, across MMA in general. I think I've seen probably hundreds and hundreds of fighters support him. And, I think there's been a few that have kind of given kind of 50-50 opinions. But honestly, overwhelmingly majority on his side. And so it is a very difficult issue. And if you look at the facts and it's a really, it's one of those things, right? Because I think Dana White, what he said is kind of one of the more powerful quotes that he's said in a long time. We hear Dana talk all the time about stuff. And for him to say, everybody says that everybody says they're going to do that, but Cain went out there and did it. And I think that he hit the nose on the head. I think maybe even if people don't necessarily think that it's justifiable, that it's the thing he should have done, they can also see kind of where he was coming from and understand it. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out. It will be interesting to see where the line is drawn, legality versus morality. I'm not sure that free Cain is going to be something that necessarily happens. But, I think that perhaps there can be taken into account from a legal standpoint, the circumstances. So maybe that will be factored in somehow into the whole thing. And maybe Cain will not get necessarily the most hefty punishment. This is all speculation, of course. But for me, man, I think the bottom line, when you take legality out of it, is just this hurts. This is tough. And seeing him in court with the masks on and in the triple XL jumpsuit. I mean, we always say all the time we cover the craziest sport, but I think that one kind of punched me in the mouth a little bit. It was pretty jarring to see. So hopefully, everything can work itself out. And I guess really it's for a judge to figure out. And I'm certainly not a judge, so we'll see what happens.
Well put, Nolan King. All right, Mike, how about you? I think, like Nolan said, we all had those feelings of rage when we found out the reasons behind why Cain may have acted that way. But, share your thoughts on from the time, you heard about the incident and what's been revealed and I guess the rally behind Cain and MMA.
Yeah. Obviously really delicate conversation here. First, I'll say major credit to Nolan for doing as well as he has covering this story for us. He's really been on top of it to beginning to end. So credit for everything he's done there. I know it's not easy stuff to look into and write about. It's, pretty heavy content there. It's just incredibly unfortunate. I mean, I'm not a father, but I'm an uncle. My sister, has two very young girls, and I just couldn't even fathom what it's like being in that scenario and the anger and the rage and the emotion. It would go through that, but no matter that scenario, I mean, this is something that he made a misjudgment. I mean, we can say whatever we want about this whole thing. He allegedly went after the wrong person. We're here having a completely different conversation if, he allegedly shoots the correct person, the person that he's going after, if that person is isolated in a situation. I think this is looked at very differently. It's a crime of passion, all those kind of things. But, the person that was, just like the children that were the child that was allegedly involved in this, who was innocent, the person that Cain shot, as far as we know, to a degree. I know people have their opinions saying this person was around the alleged molester and all that, so they were kind of guilty by association. But that person, in theory, was innocent, and they got harmed by Cain's actions. So that's something that he, messed up on if all these allegations end up being true. So that's something that kind of, I think, is ultimately going to be the backbreaker for him and how this plays out. I think, whether it's a jury of his peers or a judge or whoever this comes through a plea agreement, whatever, that's something that's going to be hard to ignore, that, he inflicted harm on someone that was, by all accounts, innocent in this situation, that he went after the wrong person. So that's something that's going to be difficult to overlook, as much as we want to, and as many arguments as you may make about it. So that's something that just kind of stands out. I wish if, he was going to take these alleged actions that had been thought through a little better, or, more properly executed, quote unquote, whatever that means.
Yeah, well said, Mike. No, I totally understand what you're saying. Goes, share your thoughts. The only thing that jumps out at me is, as Mike was talking and he was giving some circumstances, how about if that judge doesn't release the alleged molester, and he's not free on bail, like we found out about Cain? There's no one for Cain to act on. I mean, like, I've been, racking my brain around this. How about you, man? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate situation for sure. Our thoughts go out to their family, to the Velasquez family, but there's no way I can condone what he did. He broke a law, he put people in danger, but I also can't pretend like I don't understand the reasons, the reasons behind what he did. And you're right, George, like, you're absolutely right. I think the first place we need to look at is our justice system. Like, how could that guy be released in the first place? I think that's a massive error for that to happen. And I mean, I know a lot of people are coming to his defense, and the free Cain and all that. And I think a lot of it has to do with the situation. And I get that. But I believe a lot of people are coming to his defense, not because of so much the situation, but Cain himself. Like, the people that know him, this is a soft spoken man. This is a very respectful man. And, he's a good person that I think we need to kind of take that into consideration. Hopefully a judge and a jury does take that into consideration. This isn't a man that's been in the news over and over for doing these types of things. It's a situation that drove him to that. And I think a lot of people can relate. A lot of people, Cain included, would do anything for their child. And anything just happens to be a different definition for all of us, right? From man to man, that's a complete different definition of what anything entails. If you ask me personally, what I would have done, I would have beat the crap out of that guy, man, and hope that he rots in jail, and know that the fear that he's going to have in jail every day, hopefully, can somehow make you feel a little better. But Cain Velasquez is a good person, and hopefully that jury, that judge does have some leniency. But at the end of the day, this all falls on that judicial system. We need to fix that. It's ridiculous that this guy was even out on bail.
Guys, you did a brilliant job of discussing a very sensitive topic. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And folks, thank you as always for listening to the Spinning Back Clique. We'll be back next week with 5 more topics. As always, more of MMA to cover this week. Keep it locked on MMA Junkie.